Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly through the thin veil of time and wake up inside a small Victorian bedroom, where the air is chilly enough to make you wonder if your blanket has decided to go on strike. A single window rattles gently in its wooden frame, and somewhere downstairs you hear the faint clink of a kettle that may, or may not, produce water warm enough to be useful. Already, you sense the little daily battles ahead. Life is slower, quieter, and somehow louder all at once. And hygiene, well, you probably won't survive this part gracefully. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, tell me your location and local time in the comments. It's always magical seeing where everyone is drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're lying beneath a heavy quilt, blinking awake, feeling the cool air brush your face. Victorian mornings are not the kind that gently encourage you to rise. They practically dare you to. You sit up, noticing that the room smells faintly of wood smoke from last night's fire, mixed with something like damp wool. That's normal. This house, like most in the era, has no central plumbing, no taps to turn, no shower to step into. The idea of running water is in practice walking water. Someone walks it to you in a bucket. Your first task each morning begins with confronting the basin, a porcelain bowl perched on a wooden washstand, filled with whatever water was fetched earlier. And this is where you meet the morning water dilemma. The question every Victorian faces as soon as they open their eyes. Is today's water fresh? Or is it yesterday's water pretending to be fresh? A mainstream historical fact slips into view here. Most homes outside the wealthiest 1–2% did not enjoy indoor plumbing until the later decades of the century. Even by the 1890s, many neighbourhoods in big cities, London, Manchester, Liverpool, still relied on communal pumps or delivery services. Water, like Wi-Fi in a badly built apartment, was available, but only when it felt like cooperating. You step closer to the basin and see your reflection wobbling in the still, cold water. A thin film shimmers on top, harmless minerals probably, though it has the look of something that might whisper, "You sure about this?" You dip your fingers into it anyway. It's freezing. Victorian water has the personality of an ice cube with ambition. Some households warm a kettle to take the edge off, but unless someone has already risen early for chores, you get what you get. And what you get is the kind of water that wakes you up faster than the loudest alarm clock. You splash your face, flinching at the shock, feeling the iron tang cling faintly to your skin. Many Victorian pump systems carried a metallic flavour right into the home, especially in neighbourhoods where pipes were made from aging materials that would make a modern plumber faint. As your eyes water from the cold, you sense something else. Weight. Not emotional weight, though Victorian life has plenty of that, but the literal weight of dirt. Coal soot, the ever-present city companion, clings to your hairline and eyebrows like tiny enthusiastic houseguests. Victorian mornings always begin with a reminder of where you live, and the Industrial Revolution does not allow you to forget for long. You pick up the small towel beside the basin. It's rough, stiff, and determined to exfoliate you whether you asked for it or not. In wealthier homes, towels were soft enough to encourage gentle dabbing. In working households, they were closer to lightly sanded canvas. You pat your face dry, relieved the hardest part is done. At least that's what you think. Here's your quirky tidbit for the section. Some households stored water in barrels beneath kitchen floors, believing the earth kept it cool and pure. The problem was that these barrels occasionally hosted microbial parties, historians politely describe as visible growth. An 1860s commentator wrote that some stored water would not offend a pig. Good morning to you too. As you continue your routine, you can already feel the day beginning to settle on your shoulders. You hear a cart pass on the street, wheels crunching on grit. Someone's shouting about needing coal. A neighbour coughs in the hallway outside your room, the kind of deep Victorian cough that instantly reminds you why clean air was considered a luxury rather than a norm. You return to the basin for one last splash, partly out of optimism, and partly because Victorian self-care relies heavily on repetition. It's not glamorous. It's survival disguised as habit. And you start to understand why freshening up was a slow ritual, not a quick dash into the bathroom. Historians still argue whether most Victorian households preferred morning washing or evening washing, partly because personal diaries, letters and household manuals contradict each other wildly. Some families insisted on morning routines, others swore by nighttime cleansing, and many, under the weight of daily labour, simply did what they could when they could. Hygiene was a spectrum, not a schedule. The room slowly warms as sunlight filters in through thin curtains. Warm might be an exaggeration. It becomes slightly less unforgivably cold. You stretch, feeling awake in a way only ice-cold water can accomplish. Already you're sensing the rhythms of Victorian life. Long pauses, quiet chores, the soft hiss of a kettle that may or may not boil before noon. But your day has only begun, and that little porcelain basin, innocent as it looks, is only the first challenge. Because in this world, even before you get to soap, hair or clothes, water itself is a character, part friend, part foe, and always limited. You stand, towel in hand, ready for the next strange ritual of cleanliness, in a century obsessed with respectability, but utterly confused about how cleanliness actually works. You move from the basin to the rest of the chilly room, trying to convince yourself that you've already faced the worst of the morning. But the Victorian era loves a surprise, and it always saves a special one for the cold rooms and colder basins you now navigate. As you cross the floorboards, they creak under your feet in that very judgmental way old wood does, like they're muttering, "Oh, look who finally woke up." Your breath fogs slightly in the air, inside your own home, always a promising sign. Victorian interiors are notoriously drafty. The walls, though thick, aren't insulated in the modern sense. The gaps in window frames let in air that seems to have travelled straight from the Arctic with determination and a strong work ethic. Even the wealthier homes couldn't fully keep out the chill. The poorer ones often felt like someone had built a house around winter and hoped for the best. You glance again at your washstand, the basin still holding water that refuses to acknowledge basic human comfort. Victorian people washed their faces without the concept of steam, unless they were wealthy or owned a kettle that behaved. There's a reason so many household manuals repeatedly advise people to wash briskly. It wasn't about hygiene, it was about survival. Now comes the next part of your routine, freshening the rest of yourself with that same frosty water. You dip your cloth into it, wring it out, and feel your fingers go numb just long enough to make you question all your life decisions. At least the cloth absorbs water, unlike some Victorian fabrics that were basically emotional support burlap. A mainstream historical fact. By the mid-19th century, most lower and middle-class homes relied on a single fireplace for heat, usually in the main living area. Bedrooms, like the one you're standing in now, were often left unheated. Night after night, families slept in rooms that never rose above 40-50 degrees in winter. That means your morning routine isn't just cold, it's, maybe we should move into the fireplace cold. You run the cloth along your neck and behind your ears because Victorian etiquette books are strangely intense about those areas. One 1850s manual insisted that cleanliness behind the ears is the mark of a respectable person, which tells you two things. First, that someone was out there checking behind the ears, and second, that society back then was astonishingly bored. As you continue wiping down your arms, you notice something floating in the basin. Tiny flecks of coal soot drifting like little Victorian snowflakes. They get everywhere, on your clothes, on your pillow, in your hair, and now in your water. Coal-powered cities produced dust so persistent that wiping a table could feel like announcing a temporary truce, because in an hour the soot would be back, refreshed and ready to ruin your day again. You dry off with a towel that feels like it was woven from the dreams of people who hate softness. The Victorian solution to keeping fabrics clean often involved harsh lye soaps and rough scrubbing, which meant towels were functional but not comforting. A modern spa towel would have seemed suspiciously luxurious, probably witchcraft. Here's your quirky tidbit. Many Victorians believed that cold water hardened the constitution. Some even dipped their faces into basins of water with ice still floating in it. This was considered invigorating, though it's also what you might do to revive someone who fainted from the shock of Victorian rent prices. You dress slowly, layering shirts, corsets, waistcoats, or petticoats, depending on your station in life. The air doesn't get any warmer while you do this. Every garment is cold to the touch, like putting on clothes that were kept in a polite refrigerator. You try not to shiver, but it's difficult when the room is encouraging your bones to become decorative icicles. Historians still argue whether Victorian people actually felt colder than we do because their bodies adapted to daily discomfort, or whether they simply tolerated the misery better due to social expectations. Personal letters suggest a bit of both. One 1840s writer casually mentions her bed being too cold to sleep in, as if that were merely an inconvenience and not, a cry for help. You step toward the window and pull the curtain aside. Outside, the morning light is soft and hazy, filtering through industrial smoke and winter fog. Street vendors call from below, bread sellers, coal men, fishmongers. Everything carries a layer of grit, and the cold presses against the window pane like an eager visitor who hasn't been invited inside. When you step back from the window, you return to your washstand for a final glance. The basin sits there quietly, looking innocent, pretending it didn't just wage war against your nerve endings, and you realize that in a world without central heating, without hot running water, and without even the reliable promise of a warm room, these cold mornings are simply part of normal life. You tie your laces, adjust your collar, and take a deep breath. Your day will warm up slightly once you reach the kitchen, maybe. But here, in your bedroom, you've survived the most frigid part of your routine, and with your face clean, your hands washed, and your towel now damp and stiffening like it's bracing for winter too, you're ready to face whatever odd ritual Victorian hygiene throws your way next. You leave the bedroom, fingers still tingling from the cold, and head toward the small wooden table where your soap sits waiting. Waiting, but not helping. Victorian soap has the same energy as a grumpy cat. It does what it wants, when it wants, and it absolutely does not care about your feelings. Today, like every day, you're about to meet the stubborn little bar that fights back far more than it cleans. It's a pale, crumbly thing, slightly uneven around the edges, and it gives off a faint scent that tries to be pleasant, but mostly smells like someone boiled herbs near a campfire and called it a fragrance. This is your daily companion, a Victorian household treasure, a small rectangle of questionable motivation, a mainstream historical fact to ground this moment. Before mass-produced commercial soap became widely available in the later 19th century, most people used homemade or small-batch soaps made from animal fats mixed with lye. That meant the results varied wildly. Some batches came out too soft, some too brittle, some smelled faintly of mutton, and some could practically remove paint from a wall, and sometimes did. You pick up the bar and it flakes slightly, leaving a trail of soap crumbs on your fingers. Victorian soap loves to crumble, especially when the weather is cold, and when you wet it, it turns into something between glue, clay, and grit. Not ideal for gentle cleansing, but perfect if you ever need to remove the top layer of your skin. You rub the bar between your palms, creating a thin, milky lather that smells like rosemary on its best days, and like undefined barnyard energy on its worst. You apply it to your neck and arms and immediately feel the familiar sting. It's gentle compared to some others you've used, but it still tingles with that signature Victorian bite, like it's whispering, beauty is pain. Fun, in a philosophical sense. You work quickly, partly because the water is turning your hands numb again, and partly because the longer the soap stays on your skin, the more likely it is to remind you that chemistry back then was more of a hobby than a science. A modern dermatologist would take one look and file a complaint with the past. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some Victorian soaps added ground pumice, brick dust, or even ashes to make them exfoliating. Exfoliating is a polite word. Sandpaper is more accurate. One mid-century advertisement bragged that its soap could scrub the deepest impurities, which sounds suspiciously like someone tried it on a cast-iron skillet and got inspired. As you rinse off, you take in the rest of the small wash area. The mirror is slightly warped, making your reflection look tired and heroic at the same time. Your towel hangs stiffly nearby like it's sworn an oath to stay crusty forever. And the washstand creaks with each movement, as if disapproving of the entire cleansing process. Victorian cleanliness was less about feeling clean and more about looking presentable, especially for the middle class. Respectability was the ultimate goal. A soap that stung you awake and removed 3 layers of dignity was considered perfectly reasonable if it helped you appear well kept in public. But the era also produced an entire spectrum of cleansing beliefs, from the wash daily crowd to the water is dangerous. People who swore too much washing weakened the body. Historians still argue whether most Victorians washed with soap every day or kept it for weekly deeper cleaning. Personal diaries, laundry documentation, and manual instructions contradict one another. Some families used soap sparingly because it was expensive. Others used it constantly, especially in bustling cities where grime and soot settled on everything by breakfast. It seems hygiene habits varied as much as the soaps themselves. You rub your face lightly, knowing today is not a soapy face wash day. Victorians often avoided using soap on the face because it was too harsh. Instead, they relied on cold water, rose water, or gentle cloth wiping. You'd rather avoid accidentally exfoliating your nose into a different historical era. The most curious part of Victorian soap culture is that people understood it made clothes cleaner but weren't entirely convinced it improved personal health. A clean house mattered. A clean appearance mattered. But the concept of hygiene as prevention didn't fully bloom until later, when germ theory spread, unlike germs themselves, which were spreading just fine without assistance. You dry your hands on the towel, wincing slightly as the rough fibers scrape along your knuckles. It's like drying your hands with mild disappointment, or a potato sack, hard to tell the difference. Then you carefully place the soap back on its dish, where it sits like a tiny, tired soldier, waiting for the next round. You have to admire its resilience. Despite its flaws, and it has many, it's one of the few tools standing between you and Victorian grime. As you prepare to leave the room, the air feels a little warmer, and your skin, though slightly stinging, feels refreshed in that very Victorian way, clean enough to move through polite society without earning a concerned glance, but nowhere near the smooth, spa-like comfort you know today. You step toward the hallway, clothes layered, hair slightly untidy, soap scent lingering faintly in the air. The day ahead awaits, and with it, a whole new set of hygiene puzzles. But for now, you've survived the soap, which is more than some Victorians could say. You make your way toward the small dressing area, still feeling the ghost of the soap sting on your arms. Victorian soap is one challenge, but now you're stepping directly into another unavoidable truth of this era. Your hair is a problem, and the 19th century has some very questionable ideas about how to deal with it. You settle in front of the mirror, which, like most Victorian mirrors, manages to distort your reflection just enough to make you look both noble and slightly exhausted. A fitting aesthetic. You pick up a simple comb, its wooden teeth sanded smooth by years of use. Victorians treasured their hair care tools, partly because they didn't have many, and partly because hair was a symbol of respectability, health, and social identity. The problem is, washing it is an event, not a routine, an event. A mainstream historical fact enters the room like a very opinionated aunt. Most Victorians wash their hair only once every 1 to 4 weeks, depending on class, water access, and the emotional courage one needed to pour icy water over one's skull. For the working class, weekly washing could be a luxury. For wealthier households, it might happen more often, but still nothing like modern daily shampoo routines. So what do you do on the average day like today? You pick up a tin of hair powder or dry wash mixture. It smells faintly of lavender, starch, and that indefinable Victorian herbal optimism. You sprinkle a bit onto your scalp and begin rubbing it through your hair, feeling the fine dust absorb oils and add volume. It's like Victorian dry shampoo, except instead of fancy aerosol cans, you get a small cloud of powder that makes you sneeze and briefly wonder if you're seasoning yourself for later. You cough once, then twice. Victorian hair powder is many things, but subtle is not one of them. This daily maintenance process is necessary because Victorian hair, especially in polluted cities, collected soot, cooking smoke, candle wax fumes, and whatever mysterious particles floated through the industrial atmosphere. Rubbing powder through your hair helps conceal the shine of natural oils and gives your hairstyle a bit of lift, because flat hair in this era sends the same message messy hair does today. I am not okay. You comb slowly, the powder blending into your strands, transforming them from slightly greasy to somewhat matte. It's not miraculous, but it's workable. And Victorians were masters of workable. Here's your quirky tidbit for this section. Some Victorian manuals recommended beef marrow as a hair treatment. Melted, warmed, applied directly. Yes, people rubbed beef fat into their hair for nourishment and shine. The results varied. The smell also varied. And the flies, unfortunately, did not vary enough. Be grateful you're sticking with floral powders today. Once the powder has settled, you reach for hair oil. Not a modern silicone smooth serum, but a thick, lanolin-based substance Victorians swore kept hair glossy and tame. You rub a tiny amount through the ends to reduce frizz, which is historically accurate. Victorian air created frizz the way Victorian coal created everything else. The oil smells gentle, like roses and almond, and lingers pleasantly. As you work, you remember that many Victorian people believed brushing 100 times a day promoted circulation, purity, and moral character. The moral character part is questionable, but the brushing does help distribute natural oils. People with long hair often brushed religiously, especially women, whose hair care routines could take half an hour or more. Historians still argue whether middle-class Victorians truly maintained these 100-stroke routines daily, or whether etiquette books exaggerated ideal behaviours. Some diaries show dedicated adherence, others reveal much more practical rhythms, especially in homes where mothers had 8 children and approximately 0 extra minutes. You set the brush down and tilt your head, inspecting the result. Presentable, soft, powdered, slightly Victorian, slightly victorious. And now comes the slightly comedic truth. The period between hair washes was long enough that daily maintenance had to work overtime. Urban women and men alike often covered their hair with caps, bonnets, or hats, not just for fashion but to shield it from soot and disguise days-old styling. Meanwhile, children's hair was sometimes kept shorter to prevent lice, which was unfortunately a common companion in crowded living conditions. You run your fingers through your hair again, feeling how the powder smooths the texture. The scent rises faintly, a mix of lavender, starch, and whatever hope Victorian households placed in these powders. It's comforting in its way, like stepping into an old apothecary shop. Then you reach for the ribbon or pin, depending on your gender and class, to secure your hairstyle for the day. Victorian styles vary widely, from simple pinned hair to elaborate curls sculpted with heated tongs that could scorch you if used carelessly. Today, you're going simple. You pin your hair back, smooth the sides, and hope industrial soot won't undo all your hard work in the first 12 minutes outside. As you stand up from the mirror, sunlight slants through the window and illuminates a soft haze of powder still drifting lazily in the air. You wave it away gently. You don't need to inhale any more Victorian beauty products than necessary. Your hair feels cleaner, fuller, and a little more controlled. It may not be freshly washed, but it's been powdered, brushed, oiled, and disciplined into acceptable shape. That's Victorian hygiene in a nutshell. Manage what you can, disguise the rest, and trust no one who pretends their hair looks freshly washed every day. You step toward the door, ready to face the world. Your hair is set, your routine is done, and the era's strange hair care tricks have, for today at least, worked in your favour. Time to move on to the next ritual in this soft, sleepy, slightly powdery Victorian life. You head downstairs toward the kitchen area, thinking the hardest parts of your morning are over. But no, the Victorian era still has a few surprises tucked neatly under its many layers of linen and social expectations. And today's surprise is the great, groaning, eternal burden of the household, laundry day, which arrives not once a week, but whenever the pile threatens to develop its own personality. You step into the kitchen, where a large copper pot sits over the hearth like a stern school teacher. It's half filled with water that was carried in, bucket by someone with arm strength worthy of myth. Laundry, here, is not a chore. It's a small industrial operation powered by determination and questionable optimism. A mainstream historical fact drops in like a foreman holding a clipboard. Victorian laundry day could take an entire 12-16 hours, and it usually occupied an entire household. Washing machines exist in theory, but only for the wealthy, and even then, they're clunky crank-operated devices that occasionally try to eat garments. Most people spend their laundry day just doing battle with boiling water, lye soap, tubs, and scrub boards. You stand near the copper boiler, feeling heat rise from it like a sigh. The air smells faintly of wet cloth, soap shavings, and something slightly metallic, probably the pot itself. You can see the steam drifting upward, curling in lazy spirals toward the ceiling beams. This is the closest you'll get to a spa today. You roll up your sleeves, but don't wash anything yet because before washing comes sorting, soaking, beating, scrubbing, wringing, rinsing, wringing again, hanging, drying, starching, pressing, folding, and finally, realizing you missed a sock. Victorian households didn't have laundry baskets. They had mountain ranges of fabric, shirts, chemises, socks, aprons, petticoats, collars, cuffs, cravats, everyone requiring separate handling. You pick up a shirt and feel how stiff it is, still carrying the scent of sweat and coal dust. Victorian sweat isn't subtle, it works part-time as a historical record. You drop the shirt into a wooden tub where cold water waits, and it splashes like it's offended by the intrusion. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Victorian manuals advised adding urine to laundry tubs for natural ammonia. Yes, people collected it, often in jugs, and yes, this is probably the point where you start to miss your modern detergent. You're safe today. This household doesn't use that trick, but others absolutely did, and proudly. You kneel beside the washtub and pick up the washboard, a ridged wooden tool that has seen more action than most Victorian inventions. You scrub a piece of fabric against it, hearing that unmistakable rasp, like sandpaper gently flirting with a violin. Soap foam builds slowly, clinging to your knuckles. The work is repetitive, almost meditative, except for the part where your back starts complaining loudly. Victorians believed hard manual washing made fabrics truly clean. And to be fair, after 15 minutes of scrubbing one shirt, you feel morally changed as well. You glance across the room at the clothesline strung near the hearth. Damp garments hang limply, dripping into a basin below. Drying laundry indoors isn't ideal, but rainy weather or city soot often leaves no choice. In urban homes, outdoor clotheslines could collect more pollution than they lost. Historians still argue whether rural families washed less often than urban ones. Some say country households could space laundry days, weeks apart because farm clothes were expected to get dirty. Others claim the abundance of water and space made washing easier. Letters, diaries, and housekeeping guides don't fully agree. Laundry, like everything in Victorian life, varied wildly by class, geography, and sheer human energy. You wring out a garment and feel your arms protest. Victorian wringing requires grip strength that rivals blacksmiths. Large families sometimes used mechanical wringers, two big rollers you crank by hand, but these devices occasionally ate sleeves and fingers. Many a laundry day ended with someone shouting, "Stop, stop, stop," while the machine chomped through their only nice shirt. Your hands now smell of soap, steam, and fabric. You glance into the boiler, watching bubbles rise lazily to the surface. The heat warms your cheeks, a pleasant change from your icy morning wash. Laundry day is exhausting, but it has moments of comfort. Steam-softened air, warm light from the fire, and the rhythmic sounds of sloshing cloth. You lift a wooden paddle and stir the boiling pot gently, watching shirts swirl like they're attending a Victorian tea dance for garments. The room grows warmer, your sleeves dampen slightly. You feel the heaviness of the era in every step. How much labour went into something that today is a 30-minute machine cycle? Yet there's a strange satisfaction in it too. The slowness, the steady rhythm, the soft hiss of steam. Victorian life is full of difficult routines, but in these moments they become almost hypnotic. You hang the last of the damp laundry near the fire, stepping back to admire the small forest of cloth swaying gently in the warm draft. It's not glamorous, but it's essential. And for the Victorians, it's just another day, another ritual, another bit of order carved out of the soot and cold. Your hands are tired, your back aches slightly, and you smell like wet linen and hope. Laundry may not be done, but you are, at least for now. Time to move on to the next peculiar layer of Victorian cleanliness. You step away from the forest of damp laundry, stretching your back as the heat of the kitchen slowly fades from your skin. The next ritual waiting for you in this Victorian day is quiet, subtle, and surprisingly sacred. The morning. Negotiation with undergarments. Layers of linen, cotton, and sometimes wool that form the true backbone of Victorian hygiene. You make your way toward a small wooden chest against the wall. Inside it lie neatly folded garments, some freshly laundered, others waiting their turn. These are not the undergarments you know today. These are layers, plural, because the Victorians believed in many things: modesty, propriety, and the unquestioned truth that skin should rarely meet clothing directly. It's like dressing up as a human onion. You lift a chemise or undershirt from the pile, lightweight, soft from many washings, and more important than it looks. A mainstream historical fact makes itself known. Victorian undergarments served as the primary barrier between the skin and the outer clothing, absorbing oils, sweat, and dust, so the outer garments, expensive and difficult to wash, could stay fresh for far longer. To put it simply, these garments do the heavy lifting. They're the unsung heroes of cleanliness. You run your fingers over the linen fabric. It's cool and slightly textured. Linen breathes well, something Victorians appreciated even if they didn't quite understand the science behind it. You slip it over your head or step into it, feeling that first layer settle around your body like a polite handshake. This is the garment that keeps your outer clothes from needing weekly washing, because you absolutely do not want weekly washing. Then comes the next layer, drawers or petticoats, depending on your wardrobe. Drawers, newfangled in the early century and sometimes controversial, tie at the waist and are open at the crotch for practicality. Petticoats add volume and modesty, especially for women. Some people wear 2, some wear 3. Some wear so many they make rustling sounds when they walk, like a Victorian breeze. You tie the cords with a soft tug. These garments don't cling, they drape. Clothing in this era is all about managing airflow, sweat, and social rules, and every layer has a purpose. Here's your quirky tidbit. Victorian etiquette books warned people to keep their undergarments fresh, but sidestepped explaining how often fresh actually meant. Some advised changing daily. Others suggested several times a week. One 1860s manual said undergarments should be changed when soiled, which is both vague and mildly alarming. Clear instructions were apparently optional. You reach again into the chest, pulling out the long stays, corset or waistcoat depending on your gender and social class. These pieces aren't meant for washing often. They're expensive, structured, and time-consuming to maintain. That's where your underlayers come in, acting as the sacrificial fabrics in the great Victorian battle against dirt. Once the corset or stays are laced, or the waistcoat buttoned, you feel the subtle shift in posture they create. It's not painful today. You're keeping it reasonable, unlike those dramatic fashion plate caricatures that make modern ribs ache just to look at. Still, the garment shapes your torso in the Victorian silhouette, reminds you to stand straighter, breathe carefully, and never drop anything you can't pick up without kneeling. Historians still argue whether everyday corsets were comfortable or torturous. Surviving examples, diary entries, and household manuals paint a mixed picture. Some people loved them, claiming support and structure. Others hated them, complaining of heat, stiffness, or difficulty with bending. The truth may lie somewhere in the middle. Like any clothing, it depended on fit, class, and how many chores you did while wearing it. Once dressed, you feel oddly correct, as if the layers signal to the world that you're ready to participate in society. The Victorians had strong feelings about clothing as moral behaviour. Clean undergarments meant self-respect. Improper cleanliness meant laziness or even questionable character. You smooth your chemise or undershirt beneath the outer layers, careful to keep everything lying flat. These garments prevent your outer clothing from rubbing your skin, reduce chafing, and trap sweat before it reaches fabrics that may only be washed once every few weeks or months. Your outer garments, hanging on hooks nearby, look stiff, structured, and dignified. But the real comfort lies underneath. These layers aren't glamorous, but they make Victorian life bearable. The air feels cooler again as you leave the kitchen, your underlayers insulating you gently from the drafts moving through the hallway. You walk with that slight rustle only Victorian clothes can make, a soft whisper of fabric on fabric that reminds you you're wearing history on your skin. And while your undergarments may not be visible to anyone else, they determine so much: your comfort, your warmth, your hygiene, and even your reputation. A well-kept inner layer speaks quietly of order, routine, and pride. You adjust the final tie, smoothing the last crease, clothed, layered, shielded from soot, ready to face the world, Victorian style. You step out into the narrow hallway, dressed, layered, and as clean as Victorian morning rituals allow. But the moment you crack open the door to the outside world, a familiar intruder greets you: soot, the ever-present confetti of industrial life. It drifts through the air like tiny particles of Victorian enthusiasm, settling on windowsills, hairlines, cuffs, collars, and any surface bold enough to exist outdoors. And today, like every day, it wants to settle on you. You inhale carefully as though the air itself might be judging your technique. This street, your street, is lined with brick houses stained with decades of coal smoke. Chimneys jut upward at every angle, puffing dark plumes into the sky. The morning light fights heroically through it all, but even the sunshine looks a little tired. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your awareness, like a coal wagon rumbling over cobblestones. By the mid-Victorian period, Britain was burning more coal than any other nation on Earth. London alone consumed millions of tons each year. Every home, factory, bakery, smithy and steam engine fed this enormous appetite. And the result? Air so thick with soot that people sometimes wiped black residue from their faces twice before breakfast. You pull your collar up instinctively, not wanting to undo all the careful cleaning you've done. But even with precautions, you can already feel the fine grit settling gently onto your cheeks, as though the city itself is patting you on the face and saying, "Welcome back." You walk along the street, boots crunching on a layer of coal dust that coats the cobbles like powdered sugar on a cake. If the cake were made of sadness and industrialization, you pass neighbours carrying buckets, wiping their sleeves, shaking out aprons. Everyone accepts the soot, fights with it, lives with it, and somehow keeps going. As you turn a corner, the air shifts. A nearby chimney sweep's boy appears, clothes already grey from work, hair sticking up like he survived a full-blown scuffle with a fireplace. The child nods politely as he scurries past you, and you can't help but think he's both the cleanest and dirtiest person on the street at the same time. Your skin already feels slightly tacky. Coal dust clings with astonishing loyalty, like it's afraid to be left behind. You wipe a finger across your cheek and see a faint black streak, not even an hour after washing. Welcome to Victorian city life, where hygiene is less a destination and more a continuous negotiation. Here's your quirky tidbit. Victorian ladies sometimes carried soot spoons or tiny fabric mitts to dab away coal residue from their faces while travelling. Imagine stepping outside with a cute little emergency accessory, whose only purpose is cleaning industrial grime off your nose. Functional? Yes. Glamorous? Absolutely not. You continue onward, passing by a bakery with warm bread smells battling bravely against the ever-present reek of coal, smoke. A carriage rattles by, its wheels swirling the dust into little cyclones that dance around your ankles. The horse snorts, its coat dusted and grey as though it too has given up trying to look presentable. Historians still argue whether city dwellers adapted to the soot psychologically, or simply endured it because there was no alternative. Some diaries make casual mentions of wiping coal dust off breakfast plates, as though this were about as surprising as sunlight. Others complain constantly, describing endless frustrations. Dirty curtains, dirty hair, dirty lungs, dirty everything. The truth probably depends on the street, the class, and the tolerance threshold of the writer. You pause outside a shop window and catch your reflection in the slightly warped glass. You notice how quickly the cleanliness of your morning wash is fading. The soot sits lightly on your forehead and temples, giving you the appearance of someone who has worked hard before doing anything at all. And it's not just the air. The city itself contributes to your gradual darkening. You touch a railing, and your hand comes away faintly grey. You brush past a brick wall, and the sleeve of your coat picks up a shadow of the Industrial Revolution. Cleanliness here is temporary, fleeting, like a nice breeze or a good Victorian mood. Yet the city has its charm. Children run along the street, kicking up dust but laughing. Shopkeepers sweep their stoops, knowing the soot will return but wanting to make a gesture of defiance anyway. A woman leans out a window to shake a rug, sending a small puff of black particles into the air which you try very hard not to breathe in. You continue walking until you reach a quieter lane where the air clears a bit. You feel the soot on your skin, light, grainy, clingy, and you understand why many Victorians carried small cloths in their pockets. A gentle wipe helps, but only temporarily. You dab your face, watching the cloth go from white to grey. There's a funny sort of acceptance to it all. Victorian personal hygiene isn't about perfection. It's about being clean enough to function, to work, to be seen, to keep respectability intact in a world constantly sprinkling you with industrial seasoning. You take a breath, feeling your lungs stretch the way lungs should, even if the air is far from pristine. There's work to do today, errands to run, life to live, and through it all, the soot will follow you like a clingy friend who desperately needs a hobby. But for now, you push onward, dusty, determined, and very much Victorian. You continue down the soot-speckled street until you reach the part of town where the buildings grow taller, narrower, and decidedly more crowded. Here, the air changes. Not cleaner, but wetter, carrying hints of soap steam, damp cloth, and the faint metallic tang of iron pipes. You've arrived at one of the Victorian world's most important inventions for the working class, the public washhouse and bathhouse, the closest thing many people had to a bathroom outside their dreams. The building looks humble from the outside, brick walls, narrow windows, a crooked sign that simply reads baths and washes. But the moment you push open the heavy door, warm, humid air rushes toward you like a greeting hug from a slightly soggy relative. And honestly, after the cold Victorian morning, you'll take it. Inside, voices echo gently off tiled walls, mingled with the constant drip-drip of water and the low rumble of boilers working somewhere out of sight. People move about, women carrying bundles of laundry, children tugging on skirts, men shuffling toward the bathing stalls. It's busy but not chaotic. There's a rhythm here, a communal heartbeat, the shared pursuit of getting clean enough to face the world. A mainstream historical fact floats through your mind like steam. Public washhouses became common after the 1846 Public Baths and Washhouses Act, a reform movement designed to improve working-class hygiene in overcrowded cities. Before this, many families had no indoor plumbing whatsoever. Some lived in rooms so small they couldn't even fit a washtub. These communal facilities were a huge step forward, even if they sometimes resembled hot, echoing, slightly damp social experiments. You watch as a woman scrubs a shirt on a slanted washboard, elbow deep in suds, chatting with her neighbour about rising bread prices. A teenage boy carries 2 buckets of water with the exaggerated swagger of someone trying to impress anyone who will look. An old man sits near the boiler and fans himself with a hat because the heat in here is not messing around. The air smells of soap, harsh, lie-heavy, eye-watering soap, but also of companionship. Life here may be crowded, but it's connected. People share tips, gossip, complaints, and occasionally soap flakes if someone forgot theirs. You walk toward the bathing area, a sectioned-off row of cubicles with wooden doors. Each stall contains a battered tin tub, a hook for clothing, and a small shelf for soap. Privacy is minimal, but compared to scrubbing yourself in a hallway at home, or splashing at a kitchen basin while relatives walk past, this feels luxurious. You pay a small fee for your bath, the coins clinking into a metal tray held by an attendant whose job is part cashier, part bathroom referee. He leads you to a stall and pours hot water into your tub using a long-handled dipper attached to a steaming tank. The water hits the tin with a satisfying hiss, releasing a warm cloud that fogs your vision for a moment. You take a deep breath. Warm water, a rare treat, a tiny miracle. You test it with your fingers. It's not hot by modern standards, but compared to the icy basin water from this morning, it feels like a personal blessing. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some public bathhouses offered first-class and second-class baths, the former with slightly hotter water and sometimes a cleaner tub. The difference was small, but it allowed Victorians to feel socially stratified even while naked, which seems extremely on-brand for the era. You step into your cubicle and close the door behind you. The wooden latch clicks satisfyingly. Your clothes rustle as you undress, placing each layer, petticoats, chemise, undershirt, drawers, whatever you're wearing today, on the hook. Victorian clothing produces a surprising amount of fabric, even when it looks simple. Then you lower yourself into the tin tub. It creaks and sloshes as though trying to warn you that it's older than half the people in this building. The warm water envelopes your legs, then your torso, and you let out a quiet sigh you didn't know you needed. For a moment you sink into a rare Victorian luxury. Warmth, stillness, and a sense of floating escape. You scoop water over your shoulders, feeling the heat loosen the stiffness from your morning laundry work. The walls around you echo with the soft sounds of other bathers, splashing, murmured conversation, the occasional "oops, sorry" when someone bumps into a separating wall. Historians still argue whether most working-class people actually used public baths regularly or only when absolutely necessary. Some communities embraced them wholeheartedly. Others distrusted them, viewing them as impersonal or potentially unsanitary. But letters and civic records show that many families depended on them. especially those living in cramped housing with limited water access. You take your time, washing your arms, your neck, your hairline. Though you skip your full hair wash because that's a once-in-a-while ordeal. The tin tub squeaks every time you shift. The water slowly cools. You work efficiently, knowing the warmth won't last forever. When you finally step out, you feel lighter, cleaner, and slightly flushed from the steam. You dry yourself with the towel you brought, thin, scratchy, and utterly determined to remove both water and optimism from your skin. You dress layer by layer, feeling your undergarments contract slightly in the humid air. Before leaving, you take one last look at the rows of steaming tubs, the bustle of neighbours, the conversations mixing with the scent of soap and warm water. It isn't a spa, it isn't glamorous, but it's something deeply Victorian. A small, crowded, steamy corner of the world where people come together to fight the endless battle against dirt, sweat and soot. You step outside again, cleaner, warmer and a little damp, but ready to keep walking through your Victorian day. You step back out onto the street, skin still warm from the bathhouse, hair lightly powdered from earlier, undergarments freshly layered, and already the city air begins reclaiming you. Coal soot isn't sentimental, it welcomes you back instantly. But now you smell something else drifting through the air, a bouquet of perfumes, pomades, oils, and scented sachets coming from the direction of the marketplace. Victorians didn't just tolerate scents, they weaponized them. Welcome to the era of perfume, pomade, and social masking, where cleanliness isn't just about washing. It's about covering, disguising, artfully redirecting the nose, and maintaining a fragrant illusion of freshness in a world that smells most days like a chimney. You follow the scent trail to a small apothecary shop tucked between a tailor and a bakery. Its wooden sign swings gently overhead, painted with a mortar and pestle that looks only slightly haunted. The moment you push open the door, a wave of fragrance greets you. Rosewater, lavender, bergamot, musk, and that mysterious Victorian smell best described as herbal hopefulness. Inside, glass bottles line the shelves, each filled with a different colour of liquid: amber, green, faint pink, cloudy white. Labels are handwritten in elegant script: Florida water, bay rum, Queen's cologne, lavender spirit, violet pomade, elderflower essence. Some of these are delightful. Others smell like someone tried to distill enthusiasm and accidentally produced regret. A mainstream historical fact slips into your thoughts like a perfumer adjusting the wick on an oil lamp. Victorian perfumery expanded dramatically after the 1850s, thanks to advances in chemistry, trade networks, and, oddly enough, soap manufacturing. Scented soaps, scented oils, scented hair creams, scented powders. The whole era became one long olfactory project to mask the less adorable smells of industrialization. The apothecary greets you warmly, apron dusted with powder and hands faintly tinted with rose oil. He gestures to a tray of small bottles. "Something fresh today?" he asks, in that tone of gentle pity used when someone obviously needs help. You pick up a vial of lavender water and unstopper it. The scent is soft, floral and calming, the Victorian equivalent of choosing a phone background with puppies on it. You dab a little onto your wrists, feeling instantly more presentable. Perfume here isn't about luxury, it's armour. You explore further. A tin labelled brilliantine catches your eye, a hair pomade designed to smooth stray hairs and add a glossy sheen. You open it and find a creamy substance with the consistency of butter left out too long. You dab a little on your fingertips and work it lightly into your hair, taming the powdery fluff created during your morning routine. Next, you find a jar of rose pomade for lips and cheeks, a soft, tinted balm Victorians used for a hint of natural-looking colour. You try a touch and discover it has the waxy texture of something that's been passed down through 12 generations. But it works, and it smells faintly of flowers and beeswax. Here's your quirky tidbit. One of the most popular Victorian fragrances, Millefleur, advertised itself as containing the essence of 1,000 flowers. This sounds lovely until you remember that Victorian marketing sometimes meant we mixed everything we could find and hoped for the best. Some versions contained rose, jasmine, orange blossom, and occasionally animal musk strong enough to travel between dimensions. You turn from the perfumes to the sachets hanging on a wooden pegboard. Small embroidered cloth bags filled with dried herbs, violets, or patchouli. People tucked these into pockets, drawers, undergarment chests, even inside hats. Some households place them near chamber pots to wage a fragrant war against unpleasant realities. Outside the apothecary, you continue down the street, passing by a well-dressed woman whose scent hits you before she does, a bright blast of bergamot and orange blossom that lingers in the air long after she's passed. Perfume, for wealthier Victorians, wasn't subtle. It was presence, identity, a soft, fragrant announcement. But for the working class, scents were more practical. A small dab of cologne on a handkerchief to mask the odours of overcrowded streets. A bit of bay rum in the hair for a cheap, refreshing lift. A sprinkle of violet powder on the skin to fight the shine caused by soot and sweat. Historians still argue whether Victorians used perfume primarily for hygiene, fashion, or class signalling. Some argue scents were essential survival tools. Others say the perfuming craze was cultural, symbolic, and occasionally excessive. Evidence from diaries and advertisements suggests a blend of all three, practicality mixed with aspiration, mixed with a very Victorian desire for control in a chaotic world. As you walk, the scents of your morning, soap, bath water, lavender, and a hint of pomade, blend into something entirely Victorian. A scent that says, yes, the world is dirty, but I'm doing my best. You pass a flower seller carrying a pail of violets, their purple faces peeking out from a cloud of steam. You pause to buy a small nosegay, a tiny bouquet commonly used to guard against bad smells. Victorians believed flowers purified the air. Whether or not this was true, it certainly made the world feel gentler. You tuck the nosegay into your coat. It adds a soft sweetness that battles, sometimes valiantly, sometimes hopelessly, against the industrial backdrop. With a final glance back at the apothecary's doorway, you continue down the street, stepping into the mingled scents of a world trying very hard to smell better than it actually does. Perfume on your wrists, pomade in your hair, lavender on your collar, a small bouquet at your heart. Victorian hygiene isn't just seen, it's smelled. You continue your walk through the bustling Victorian street, the scent of lavender from your collar mixing with the ever-present undertone of coal dust. As you pass a row of shops, bakers, cobblers, butchers, you notice a smaller storefront with a sign shaped like a giant tooth. A cheerful, slightly unsettling tooth, the kind that suggests confidence, but also hints that it has seen some things. Welcome to the next stop in your hygiene journey. Victorian dental care, which is equal parts innovation, improvisation, and sheer willpower. You step inside. The shop is bright, noticeably cleaner than most places, and filled with the soft clinking of glass jars. Shelves are lined with tins and canisters labelled dentifrice, tooth powder, mouth sweeteners, and the intimidating tartar scrapers. A bell rings as the door shuts behind you, and a gentleman in an apron looks up from polishing an instrument that resembles a villain's favourite tool. "Morning," he says warmly, looking to keep that smile respectable today. You give him a polite nod. In the Victorian era, a respectable smile is not optional. It's a sign of good breeding, self-discipline, and proper manners. A mainstream historical fact joins you like an enthusiastic assistant. Victorians used tooth powders far more often than toothpaste, which didn't become widespread until late in the century. These powders were made from combinations of chalk, crushed shells, charcoal, baking soda, orris root, and sometimes downright questionable ingredients like brick dust. You pick up a tin of tooth powder and shake it gently. Inside, you hear the soft, sandy rattle of its contents. The label promises whiteness and freshness. You read the ingredients list. Chalk, mint oil, powdered cuttlefish bone. It sounds like someone tried to invent dental care using whatever they found in a craft drawer. The shopkeeper hands you a small brush, not a modern toothbrush, but a wooden handle fitted with stiff bristles that feel like they were designed with punishment in mind. Victorians had toothbrushes, but the bristles were often made from boar hair, which doesn't exactly scream comfort. You dip the brush lightly into the powder and begin carefully rubbing it along your teeth. The texture is gritty, like brushing with fine sand. The taste? Chalky, with a faint echo of mint that tries its best to uplift the experience. As you scrub, you wonder whether you're cleaning your teeth or erasing them. The shopkeeper nods approvingly. "Good technique," he says. "Most people forget the inner surfaces." You appreciate the encouragement even as your mouth begins to feel like a chalkboard. Here's your quirky tidbit of the section. Some Victorian dentifrices contained powdered charcoal mixed with honey. Yes, honey. The logic was that charcoal cleaned and honey preserved. The reality was that many people accidentally glued their toothbrush bristles together, and sometimes glued their mouths shut, with sticky residue. Truly, dental care was an adventure. When you've scrubbed thoroughly enough to satisfy both yourself and your imaginary Victorian dentist, you spit into a small porcelain bowl. No running water here, just a bowl that someone eventually must empty, the unsung hero of hygiene. Your mouth feels cleanish, the way a freshly erased chalkboard feels ready for new ideas. But something else catches your eye. A small bottle labelled mouth sweeteners. You open it, releasing a scent of peppermint and herbs. These tiny lozenges were used to freshen breath, especially important in a world where garlic-heavy meals, coal smoke, and inconsistent toothbrushing created atmospheres strong enough to peel wallpaper. You pop one into your mouth. It fizzes faintly. It tastes herbal, sharp, refreshing, and slightly medicinal, like someone tried to combine a breath mint with a remedy for ennui. Victorians took dental hygiene seriously, even if their tools were limited. They believed a clean mouth showed discipline. They also believed, incorrectly, that brushing too often could harm the enamel. Some people brushed daily, others brushed weekly. Still others relied on chewing sticks, rinses, or simply wiping their teeth with a cloth. Historians still argue whether dental decay was worse in the Victorian era than in earlier centuries. On one hand, sugar consumption skyrocketed during the Industrial Revolution. On the other, early Victorian diets were still far less sugary than modern ones, and people lost teeth regularly for a whole variety of reasons. Poor diet, infections, accidents, and misguided medical treatments. The truth is hazy, like a London fog. What's clear is that Victorians were aware their dental situation wasn't ideal, and they were trying. You look around the shop again. On one shelf you spot a bottle labelled tincture of myrrh, used as a mouth rinse. Next to it, small tools gleam under the lamplight, scrapers, picks, pliers. Not for sale to the average customer, but used by the local dentist who probably visits once a week. Dental visits are rare, expensive, and often painful in a century before reliable anaesthesia. Many people choose to pull their own teeth at home, usually with the assistance of whiskey and questionable resilience. You shiver slightly at the thought. Another bottle catches your eye. Tooth soap. Yes, tooth soap. Small, chalky cakes that you scrape with your brush to create a lather. It smells faintly of lemon and ashes, a surprisingly pleasant combination considering the alternatives. With your teeth brushed and your breath newly sweetened, you thank the shopkeeper and step back outside. The air hits your face, carrying with it the familiar coal smell that will probably undo all your progress within minutes. But for now, your mouth feels fresh, your teeth feel cleaner, your breath could pass in polite society. You walk onward, feeling the gritty memory of the tooth powder still lingering slightly on your tongue, but appreciating the effort. In a world without fluoride, electric toothbrushes, or flavoured toothpaste options that sound like desserts, Victorians did remarkably well. And as you continue down the street, breath mint dissolving, hair pomade holding, lavender nosegay tucked into your coat, you realise Victorian hygiene isn't about comfort, it's about persistence. Scrub, brush, sprinkle, scent, layer after layer of effort. A whole choreography of staying presentable in a world that works against you. Your teeth may not sparkle like a modern toothpaste commercial, but they belong to a Victorian day well lived. You continue walking, the chalky whisper of tooth powder still lingering in your mouth, when a new realisation settles over you like a quiet shadow. Your hands. You glance down at them, slightly dry from harsh soap, faintly grey from the ever-present coal dust, and undeniably Victorian. And suddenly you remember something important about this era. Hand washing is optional, or at least it's treated with the same level of enthusiasm as we treat expired leftovers. Everyone knows it should happen, but not everyone commits. You pause beside a small water pump on the street corner. Its iron handle is slick from morning dew and daily use. The basin below it is stained with rust and mineral residue. A few people line up, filling tin pitchers, buckets, or jars, but almost no one is using it to wash their hands. A mainstream historical fact appears with perfect timing. Victorians did not yet understand germ theory, at least not widely, until the late 19th century. The idea that tiny invisible organisms cause disease, that sounded like magic, or nonsense, or both. Most people still believed illness came from miasmas, bad air, swampy smells, or general moral failings. So when it comes to hygiene, hands didn't get the star treatment they receive today. They were washed when visibly dirty before church, or when preparing food, but not habitually. You glance at your own hands again, feeling that slight grit of soot settled into the lines of your palms. You press the pump handle, water splashes into the basin with a metallic groan, and you cup your hands beneath the stream. It's cold. Of course it's cold. Water in this era is legally obligated to be freezing, and it shocks your skin awake. You rub your palms together, using a small pinch of soap from your pocket. The scent is faint, a mild herbal smell that you hope masks the sharper tang of metal. You scrub between your fingers, along your wrists, across the backs of your hands. Nothing fancy, just enough to make you feel like a responsible Victorian citizen, which is largely a matter of appearing respectable while doing the bare minimum required by society. A woman next to you watches curiously. "Bit early for washing?" she asks. You smile politely. "Just trying to stay tidy," you say. She shrugs as if tidiness is admirable, but also slightly suspicious, then returns to filling her water jug. Once your hands dry in the chilly morning air, you continue on, considering the strange relationship Victorians have with hand hygiene. In a world full of soot, sweat, and questionable street surfaces, you might expect more compulsive washing. But people simply didn't yet know what their hands carried. Here's your quirky tidbit. In the mid-1800s, some surgeons performed operations without washing their hands at all, not out of laziness, but because the medical community hadn't connected contamination with infection. One famous surgeon even wore the same blood-stained coat during every procedure as a badge of honor. Meanwhile, nurses cleaning hospital linens often wash their hands more out of instinct than instruction. You walk past a butcher's stall where the vendor handles raw meat with bare hands, then wipes those hands on his apron before accepting coins and handing out bread rolls. It's not unusual, it's normal. It's the Victorian way. Trust your eyes, not invisible threats. Historians still argue whether certain communities intuitively practice better hygiene despite the lack of germ theory. Some evidence suggests that midwives, herbalists, and traditional healers washed their hands more often than doctors, perhaps guided by experience rather than science. Others argue that hand washing was inconsistent across all professions, and improvements only rose with public health campaigns in the late century. As you cross another street, you notice a few children playing near a gutter, thin streams of wastewater trickling past them. They splash sticks in the runoff, laughing, carefree, and utterly unconcerned. Victorian childhood is many things, but sterile isn't one of them. You step carefully around the slick cobblestones. The smell of manure, damp wood, and coal fumes blends into the sort of aroma that makes you wonder why Victorian perfume wasn't simply marketed as better than outside. Just ahead, you spot a vendor selling small cakes of scented soap. The bars are tiny but fragrant, wrapped in paper decorated with flowers. You buy one, your third piece of soap today, and tuck it into your pocket. A little extra cleanliness never hurts. As you walk, rubbing your thumb over the wrapped bar, you consider how differently people perceive hygiene in this century. For Victorians, staying clean is about looking fresh, not preventing illness. Clean hands mean respectability. Dirty hands mean hard work. The idea that invisible microbes are plotting against you hasn't quite entered the narrative yet, though soon, very soon, it will. You head toward the next part of your day, hands cleaner than most of the people around you, and perhaps cleaner than most Victorians ever expected to be before dinner. You smile to yourself. Small details, small rituals, small victories. That's Victorian hygiene. Not perfect, never perfect, but intentional in its own charming, half-informed way. You continue down the street, feeling your freshly washed hands cooling quickly in the morning air when the scenery begins to shift around you. Gone are the dense brick buildings and the endless forest of chimneys coughing soot into the sky. As you walk farther from the city centre, the air opens up, the roads widen, and the crowds thin. Soon the industrial soundtrack fades into something gentler. Wind through hedges, distant livestock, the faint hum of a cart rolling across packed dirt. You're now moving from Victorian city life to country life, and with this shift comes a completely different set of hygiene expectations and realities. The contrast is so sharp you almost feel it brushing against your cheek. A mainstream historical fact joins you on this stroll. Cleanliness in rural areas often surpassed urban hygiene, not because of sophistication, but because there was simply less pollution, more space, and, crucially, more access to fresh water. Farms, villages, and small hamlets commonly had wells, streams, or pumps that weren't shared by hundreds of people at once. You inhaled deeply, fresh air, actual fresh air. No coal dust, no industrial fog, just dirt, plants, and the gentle whiff of cows. And strangely, it smells like freedom. You walk along a country lane, the kind that curves around hedgerows and dips through patches of soft mud. A woman tending her garden waves at you. Her apron looks worn but clean in a practical everyday way that city dwellers rarely achieve. A bucket of well water sits nearby, clear enough to reflect her face. You crouch beside the well and peer into it. Light glints softly off the surface below. There's something soothing about seeing water that doesn't resemble a light broth of soot. You dip your fingers in. It's cold, but refreshingly so. Not the aggressive urban cold that threatens to steal your skin, but a crisp, natural chill. In the countryside, washing is more straightforward. A quick splash at the pump, a basin filled with well water, clothes hung on sprawling lines stretching across gardens or between sturdy apple trees. Rural people also dealt with dirt, mud, manure, ash from hearth fires, but it came without the chemical extras of city grime. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some rural households kept small washing hedges, where clothes were draped directly over warm bushes to dry, nature's laundry rack. The result was fresh-smelling garments with accidental leaf prints and occasional twig stowaways. You keep walking, noticing how rural homes are arranged not on rigid streets but on gentle slopes, around fields, or clustered near a shared green. A few chickens cluck and trot across your path, feathers ruffling proudly. You step around them, grateful for the moment of pure pastoral chaos. Then you enter a farmhouse kitchen. Steam rises from a kettle on the stove. A woman stirs porridge with one hand and wipes down the table with the other. The room smells of herbs, warm, milk and wood smoke, a far cry from the city's harsh industrial odour. Near the door sits a large wash basin filled with water drawn that morning. Everyone in the household will use it before breakfast. Hands, faces, sometimes even arms up to the elbow if the day promises heavy labour. Water isn't rationed here. It's plentiful, abundant, part of daily life. Bathing, while still not a daily habit for most, happens more comfortably. Children are scrubbed often because they spend half the day rolling in mud like joyful little potatoes. Even adults wash more frequently simply because they can. Yet the countryside has its own hygiene quirks. Indoor plumbing is nearly non-existent. Outhouses serve as the standard. Cold weather freezes the pump in winter, and certain corners of the rural world believe strongly in air baths, standing naked in the morning breeze for health, which sounds peaceful unless the breeze is particularly judgmental that day. Historians still argue whether rural families or urban families were cleaner overall. Diaries show both perspectives. Some rural people bathed infrequently due to workload and cold weather. Some city people washed more because public baths were available. Some households in both regions prided themselves on immaculate linens. Others shrugged and let dirt be dirt. Cleanliness, it seems, depended less on geography and more on personality, class, and access to water. You leave the farmhouse and walk toward a patch of open fields. Sunlight breaks through the clouds, warming your face. You feel oddly refreshed, maybe from the cleaner air, maybe from the slower pace, maybe from the simple relief of not inhaling a lungful of soot every 3 seconds. A carriage rattles past, but instead of kicking up coal dust, it stirs only a soft plume of country earth. A horse snorts nearby, and its breath clouds gently in the cool air. Even the animals seem cleaner here, not in the pristine sense, but in the natural sense. You take another deep breath and smile. The countryside feels like a reprieve from the constant battle against urban grime. Your clothes remain cleaner longer. Your hair stays smoother without soot. Your hands, for once, don't immediately turn grey after washing. But as peaceful as this is, the Victorian day isn't finished with you. Soon you'll return to the city, back to its noise, its crowds, and its endless need for daily, constant, often futile hygiene efforts. For now, though, you savour the rare feeling of being clean and staying clean, even if only for a moment. You slowly make your way back toward the city, the clean countryside air fading behind you like a pleasant memory you weren't allowed to keep. By the time you cross into the bustling streets again, the familiar scents of coal, wet horse and ambition settle neatly around you. And now, after all the small rituals of daily hygiene, after the morning wash stand, the hair powder, the hand pump, the apothecary, you reach one of the most elaborate, time-consuming and deeply Victorian rituals of all, a full-body bath, a rare event, a production, an ordeal disguised as a luxury. You turn down a narrow lane and arrive at a respectable middle-class home, not wealthy enough for constant hot running water, but not poor enough to rely solely on public washhouses. Here, if the household is properly organised and the boiler behaves, a full bath can be arranged. But it requires planning, people, and a surprising amount of diplomacy. A mainstream historical fact announces itself politely. In most Victorian households, a full bath was a weekly or bi-weekly event, sometimes even less. Water had to be heated on stoves, kettles, or copper boilers, carried room to room in heavy buckets, and poured into a portable tub that lived anywhere except where you actually needed it. Inside the home, there's a stir of activity. 2 servants haul large steaming kettles from the kitchen, steps thudding loudly on the stairs. A wooden hip bath, a short upright tub meant for sitting more than soaking, is positioned near the fireplace to keep the room warm. The fire crackles, sending a pleasant glow over the scene. You watch them pour the steaming water into the tub. A cloud of white mist rises, softening the room with warmth. Then comes a bucket of cold water to mix it down, because scalding yourself was not considered refined behaviour. The resulting bath is shallow by modern standards, but by Victorian ones, this is decadence. The servant offers a tired smile. Won't stay warm long, she warns. A gentle reminder that Victorian bathing is a race against time. You undress behind a folding privacy screen, a tall wooden divider draped with fabric. Victorian modesty is intricate. Even if a servant is already hauling your bathwater around the house, the idea of being seen undressed remains deeply taboo. Once alone, you step carefully into the hip tub. The curved back supports you as best it can, though it creaks in protest. Your knees stick out awkwardly. There's no lying down gracefully in this thing. Victorian comfort is more conceptual than physical. But the moment the warm water closes around your torso, your bones sigh. This isn't your morning basin splash. This is warmth, soft, enveloping warmth that seeps into tired muscles and lifts the day's grime like a gentle tide. You reach for the soap, which is slightly less aggressive when combined with warm water. The lather forms easier, the sting reduces, the scent improves. Your hands glide in circular motions over your arms, your shoulders, your legs. The heat coaxes looseness into your joints, washing away the stiffness from carrying laundry, walking long streets, and wrestling with Victorian fashion. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some households reused bathwater. Not proudly, but practically. The eldest bathed first, followed by the next in line, until the last child climbed into water so murky it had given up all hope. If you were lucky enough to bathe early, congratulations. You were clean and respected. You soak a little longer knowing the water is cooling fast. Victorian tubs lose heat like champs. You hear the faint whistle of wind outside, the distant clip-clop of hooves, and the soft pop of the fire beside you. The room feels intimate and soothing. You pour warm water from a jug over your hair, not for a full wash, but to rinse the soot from your roots. Hair washing remains a separate ordeal, requiring drying cloths, powders, and enough time to recover emotionally. Historians still argue how often Victorians truly bathed. Some say weekly bathing was normal by the late century for middle-class homes with good stoves. Others insist many families bathed monthly or even seasonally, relying on daily sponge baths instead. Documentation varies by region, wealth, and how honest the diarist was feeling. You reach for a long-handled bath brush, the Victorian equivalent of self-care. Its bristles glide over your shoulders, down your back, over your calves. You feel refreshed in a way that's almost sleepy. A calm, floating sensation, amplified by the warmth of the room and the low, comforting hum of domestic life around you. But slowly, inevitably, the water cools. The fire's glow can only do so much. Goosebumps rise on your skin. It's time to step out. You grab a thick towel, thick for Victorian standards, thin by modern ones, and wrap yourself in it. The fabric scratches a bit, but it's warm. You dry yourself quickly, mindful of drafts. Then come the underlayers again. Linen against skin, soft and reassuring. As you dress, you feel lighter. cleaner. The scent of warmed soap lingers faintly on your arms. Your hair feels softer, your posture eases, and for a brief moment you're experiencing Victorian luxury. A full-body bath not rushed by public schedules, not limited by a single kettle, not spiced with the atmospheric seasoning of London soot. You step away from the now cool tub, steam fading gently into the room, and wonder how long this fresh feeling will last. Hours, if you're lucky. Minutes, if you step outside. But right now, you feel renewed, refreshed, almost modern. Victorian bathing may be rare and labour-intensive, but when it happens, it's nothing short of a small, private miracle. You leave the warm bathing room behind, skin still tingling, hair softening as it dries, and clothes resting comfortably against you. But as you walk back into the bustling Victorian world, you're reminded that your refreshed state, rare, fleeting, precious, is not the norm for everyone, especially not in the places where people go when they're unwell. Today, you're stepping into one of the most unpredictable spaces of the era, the Victorian medical world, where hygiene, beliefs, hope, and confusion collide like mismatched puzzle pieces. You make your way down a narrow street where the buildings grow older and the windows loom close. A sign hangs above a doorway, physician and surgeon, painted in bold letters that promise confidence, even if the experience inside often provides the opposite. The door creaks as you enter. The room smells faintly of alcohol, herbs, coal smoke, and something metallic. Instruments lie neatly arranged on a table. Forceps, scalpels, saws, and various tools that look like they belong in the toolbox of someone who definitely shouldn't stand near your body with them. A single window lets in murky daylight. A mainstream historical fact arrives like a cautious whisper. Victorian hospitals and doctors' offices often lacked basic sanitation until the late 19th century, when pioneers like Joseph Lister introduced antiseptic methods. Before that, cleanliness was considered polite, not essential. Many physicians performed examinations and even surgeries without washing their hands, wiping instruments on aprons that had seen far too much. You take a seat on a wooden bench, noticing faint stains on the wall, dampness, soot, medical history. You decide not to ask. A doctor emerges from an adjoining room wearing a long coat with a faint brownish pattern that probably started its life as something else. He greets you warmly, though his coat, his hands, and his tools look deeply unconcerned about the concept of microbes. He asks if you're well. You say you're simply curious about hygiene. He laughs, a deep, hearty laugh that suggests good humour but also mild disbelief that someone would worry so much about such a tiny detail as clean hands. You glance at a basin in the corner, empty, dry, unused. Washing hands isn't part of the routine here. Soap is nearby, but more for the doctor's appearance than his practice. Victorians often associated dirt with disease, but only in the vague filth is bad sense, not in the microscopic invisible organisms are invading your bloodstream sense. The doctor picks up a metal tool from the table without cleaning it, and holds it in the light. Fine craftsmanship, he says proudly, never fails me. The tool gleams. It is, undeniably, well made. But you can't help imagining the ghosts of previous patients clinging to it like over-enthusiastic souvenirs. You shift in your seat. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Victorian hospitals banned flowers because the overpowering scent was believed to spread disease, while allowing actual contaminated instruments, linens and hands to remain unwashed. Flowers were blamed, hands were not. The logic was creative. You follow the doctor into a small room meant for examination. The bed is narrow, covered with a clean sheet, at least cleaner than most surfaces here. A nurse glides in, wearing a crisp uniform and carrying a tray of bandages. Nurses often kept better hygiene than doctors, especially as the century progressed. Many learned early practices from folk remedies, midwifery, or the teachings of Florence Nightingale, who insisted on ventilation, cleanliness, and order long before germ theory caught on. The nurse politely hands the doctor a cloth. He wipes his hands on it. Not clean, just dry. You watch as they prepare for a hypothetical patient. The instruments are arranged carefully, the room is aired out slightly, and fresh bandages are set within reach. Victorian medical spaces were improving slowly, unevenly, with each new discovery, each new public health reform, each new instruction from pioneering voices. Historians still argue whether the average Victorian hospital was a place of progress or peril. Some institutions implemented strict cleanliness measures. Others resisted new practices, believing tradition mattered more than change. Mortality rates varied dramatically, depending on the philosophy and stubbornness of the staff. You leave the examination room with a deeper appreciation of your modern world. Hygiene here is a patchwork, ambitious in theory, inconsistent in practice. Outside again, you breathe cleaner air. Your body feels warm from the earlier bath, your clothes rest comfortably, and your scent is a pleasant mix of lavender and rose pomade. But now you carry a fresh awareness of the Victorian paradox. People washed themselves with cold water, worried about visible dirt, used perfumes like armor, but trusted medical tools rinsed in nothing but confidence. You walk on, still Victorian for the day, but with a modern understanding pressing softly at the back of your mind. Cleanliness here is evolving, shifting, deeply imperfect. But each small habit, each wash, each brush, each scent, pushes society closer to a world where hygiene becomes science rather than superstition. For now, you continue moving through this complex, half-clean, half-chaotic landscape, on your way to the next quietly revealing corner of Victorian daily life. You leave the doctor's office behind, hands mercifully unscathed, nerves slightly jangled, and step back into the bustle of Victorian life. But now you notice something different in the flow of people around you. Children, everywhere, darting between skirts, tugging on sleeves, chasing hoops down the street, shouting, laughing, and occasionally coughing with the kind of determination only a Victorian child can muster. And suddenly, you're pulled toward another corner of hygiene in this era, one shaped by routine, improvisation, and sheer necessity, childhood cleanliness and school life. Victorian children occupy a strange place in the hygiene spectrum. They're expected to be neat, combed hair, scrubbed faces, tidy clothes, but they also live in a world where dirt is both unavoidable and sometimes a sign of healthy outdoor play, a paradox in tiny boots. You follow a small girl in a pinafore and wool stockings as she trots toward a schoolhouse. Her hair is braided neatly, but one ribbon is already attempting escape. Her shoes are clean at the toes and muddy everywhere else. Classic Victorian childhood. A mainstream historical fact slips in like a teacher tapping a chalkboard. Victorian schools emphasized appearance and discipline. Children were inspected for clean faces, clean hands, trimmed nails, and tidy hair each morning. Teachers believed a clean child was a well-behaved child. Dirt meant disorder. Disorder meant moral decay. Of course, clean here is relative. The girl reaches the school door, where a stern woman stands armed with a damp cloth and a disapproving expression. She inspects each child's face, wiping away smudges of soot, crumbs from breakfast, or evidence that someone had recently been wrestling with a goose, not uncommon in rural areas. When your turn comes, she lifts the cloth to your cheek. "Chin up," she says. She wipes. The cloth darkens. "Better," she mutters, though her tone suggests mild disappointment in the entire concept of oxygen. Inside the schoolroom, the air smells faintly of chalk, wet wool, ink, and 20 children, who each bathed recently. Enough. Rows of desks stretch across the room, each carved with names, initials, and the occasional artistic attempt at a horse. Children remove their caps and bonnets, revealing an array of hairstyles held together with ribbons, pins, ambition, and the occasional leftover breadcrumb. Clean hair, sort of. Freshly washed, rarely. But most importantly, no lice today, hopefully. Here's your quirky tidbit. Victorian teachers often inspected children for lice with the same seriousness they inspected handwriting. Some schools kept a special knit comb for emergency use. One comb, many heads. A hygienic nightmare by modern standards, but a standard tool of Victorian childhood. You take a seat. The desk lid squeaks. A boy beside you smells faintly of soap and onions, a combination you somehow don't question. He grins at you, revealing a missing tooth and the unmistakable chalky traces of tooth powder on his lips. Someone at home is trying. The teacher begins her lesson, tapping the chalk like it owes her money. Children raise hands, recite verses, and copy letters onto slate boards they wipe clean with small cloths that were probably last washed during the Crimean War. During break, you step outside with them. Sunlight warms the gravel yard. Children chase each other, climb wooden beams, and kick up enough dust to coat every clean face within minutes. A girl falls, gets up, brushes dirt from her skirt, and keeps running without a second thought. Victorian children are built of stubbornness, dairy, and immunity systems forged in the fires of soot. You notice a small pump at the corner of the schoolyard. Children crowd around it, splashing water onto their hands, or more often onto each other. Teacher supervision is minimal. Cleanliness becomes chaos within seconds. A boy uses the pump to fill his cap, dumps it on his friend's head, and both laugh so hard they nearly collapse. The teacher sighs but doesn't intervene. Childhood joy outweighs hygiene, at least for the next 5 minutes. Historians still argue whether Victorian children were cleaner in urban settings or rural ones. Rural kids had more outdoor dirt but cleaner air. City kids battled soot but had access to bathhouses. Diaries show families all over Britain struggling to keep children tidy, as though the universe itself conspired to make every Victorian child a magnet for filth. After recess, children line up once more. The teacher wipes the worst cases with her cloth again. You join the line. You're wiped again. This is your life now. Back in the classroom, the children recite verses from memory. You feel the shift in the room as the morning moves toward lunchtime. The air thickens with hunger, wool, chalk, and the scent of 20 tiny humans doing their best. Before you leave, you watch a mother arrive with a toddler whose face is covered in something sticky and unidentifiable. She wipes him with a handkerchief already saturated with the morning's efforts. He squirms. She sighs. It's a universal moment. Timeless, weary, affectionate. Victorian childhood hygiene isn't spotless. It isn't sterile. It isn't modern. But it's cared for, scrubbed, checked, managed, and maintained with determination and cloths that deserve medals. As you walk away from the school, you hear children laughing behind you, a sound so bright it almost cleans the air itself. And you smile, knowing the next part of your day will take you to yet another corner of Victorian life, where cleanliness isn't about innocence or discipline, but survival. You leave the schoolyard behind, the echoes of children's laughter still trailing after you like a cheerful little parade, and step deeper into the heart of Victorian daily life, into the part of the city where chimneys grow taller, windows shrink smaller, and the air carries that familiar metallic heaviness of industry. The noise increases, the crowd thickens, and now you find yourself entering a world where cleanliness isn't about modesty, discipline, or social respectability. It's about survival. Today, you're walking into the Victorian workplace, factories, mills, workshops, places where sweat is constant, water is scarce, and hygiene is less a routine and more a heroic act of persistence. The clatter meets you first, iron on iron, gears humming, belts whipping, steam hissing, voices shouting over machines that sound like they have strong opinions. A mainstream historical fact appears like a factory foreman with a clipboard. Victorian industrial work was brutally physical, poorly ventilated, and packed tightly with labourers whose bodies were pushed to their limits. Cleanliness was not merely difficult, it was borderline impossible during long shifts. You step inside a textile mill and immediately hot air hits you like a woolen wave. Dust floats in the sunlight, creating shimmering columns of fluff, beautiful from afar, suffocating up close. Workers sit at long rows of spinning frames, hands moving so fast they blur. Sweat beads instantly on your brow. Everyone is warm, everyone is tired, everyone is sweaty, and almost no one smells like lavender. A woman passing by tucks a cloth into her collar to catch perspiration. A teenager wipes his face on a sleeve already stiff from earlier wipes. Someone has pinned a sprig of herbs inside her bodice, not for fashion, but to combat the constant smell of damp wool. You walk through the room carefully, weaving between machines, stepping over baskets of raw fibre. The workers barely look up. They're too focused on keeping fingers, hair and clothing away from the moving gears that could catch them in an instant. This is where Victorian hygiene and Victorian labour collide. A man at the far end stands beside a furnace shoveling coal. Every motion sends soot blooming into the air, settling on his hair, his cheeks, his collar. His skin is slick with sweat, which forms little rivers through the black dust like tiny industrial streams. You wipe your forehead. You look at your hand. Black streak. Welcome back to city life. Here's your quirky tidbit. Many factory workers carried pocket towels, strips of cloth specifically for wiping soot, sweat or grease. These towels were used until they became stiff, dark, and practically self-aware. Wash day didn't always include them. Some were simply retired when they could stand up on their own. You continue walking, stepping into another workshop where the atmosphere shifts. Here, carpenters work with saws, planes, and chisels, wood shavings, scatter across the floor, sticking to sweat-moistened forearms. The room smells of pine resin and human effort. It's cleaner than the mill, but no less exhausting. A young man pauses to wipe his hands. He dips them briefly into a bucket of water that's turning browner by the minute. There is no soap, just grit and hope. He dries them on a rag, shrugs, and returns to work. Victorian workplaces often lacked designated wash areas. Some factories had communal basins. Others had nothing at all. Workers would rinse hands in rain barrels, wipe sweat with aprons, or wash faces at the nearest pump on the walk home. Historians still argue whether employers encouraged cleanliness. Some factories promoted hygiene to reduce illness. Others insisted that any time not spent working was wasted. In mining communities, washing might be offered at the pit head. In textile mills, cleanliness depended heavily on the overseer's personality. You head toward a lunch area where workers sit on crates and barrels. Some eat bread, some eat cheese, some eat nothing. No one washes their hands before eating, not because they don't want to, but because there's simply no place to do so. A man bites into a sandwich with fingers still blackened from coal dust. A woman eats an apple that now tastes faintly of cotton fibres. A boy drinks water from a communal jug that everyone uses and no one questions. Then the bell rings. Lunch is over, back to work. The heat returns, the noise intensifies, the air thickens, and you realise that Victorian workers understood hygiene as a luxury more than a habit. At home, people scrubbed. At church, they polished. At the apothecary, they perfumed. But here, in the engine room of the century, cleanliness was an afterthought overshadowed by survival, wages, and exhaustion. You step outside the building and the fresh air, though still coal-scented, feels glorious. You wipe your hands again, feeling the gritty mixture of soot and sweat. Even your nosegay of violets is struggling. You take a deep breath, letting the cool breeze hit your face. Slowly the dust begins to settle. Your clothes cool, your skin stops prickling. Victorian work is harsh. Victorian cleanliness is fragile. And yet, everyone pushes forward anyway. You walk on, thinking of workers who end each day grimy, exhausted, and ready to scrub off the evidence of their labour in a tiny wash basin at home, if the water bucket wasn't emptied by someone else first. Your Victorian journey continues, leading you toward a stranger corner of the hygiene world, one filled with fads, fashion, and the era's delightful belief that water itself might hold spiritual power. You leave the industrial district behind, dusting off your sleeves as you go, and soon the air shifts again. Not quite cleaner, but infused with something curious. Sweetness, steam, citrus. You turn a corner and find yourself standing before a storefront unlike the others you've seen today. Its sign reads, "Vitality restored, health renewed, refreshments for body and spirit." And below, in decorative lettering, the grand hydropathic parlour and scented bathrooms. Ah, yes. Welcome to the Victorian world of scented parlours and bathing fads, where cleanliness collides with pseudoscience, health theories, and a sprinkle of theatrical confidence. You push the door open. A little bell tinkles delicately, as though announcing your entrance to a room that takes itself very seriously. Inside, warm vapour wraps around you instantly, carrying the scents of eucalyptus, citrus oils, lavender steam, and the faint hum of hope. Rattan chairs line the waiting area. The wallpaper features swirling vines. A small fountain gurgles quietly in the corner, as though doing its best to assure you this place is sophisticated, and definitely not improvising. A sharply dressed attendant approaches with a pamphlet. "Welcome," he whispers, because everyone here whispers. "Please enjoy our treatments designed to restore vitality and promote perfect internal harmony." You accept the pamphlet and skim the offerings. Cold plunge bath for bracing the spirit, lemon steam therapy for clearing the lungs, scented sitz bath for reasons, magnetized water infusion, no comment, restorative foot vaporization, still no comment, electric bath, mild tingling expected. A mainstream historical fact floats in like a gentle mist. Hydrotherapy, water-based healing, became wildly popular in the Victorian era, thanks to the advocacy of reformers like Sebastian Kneipp and institutions like Malvern and Matlock Baths. Water, Victorians believed, could cure nearly anything if applied in the correct temperature, quantity and level of enthusiasm. You're led into a softly lit room where a large porcelain tub sits surrounded by greenery and gauzy curtains. Warm steam rises from it, carrying hints of rose and chamomile. A small candle glows on a shelf. Everything here whispers, "You are safe, you are healing." Also, please pay at the front before leaving. A woman in a simple uniform pours a vial of oil into the bath, creating shimmering patterns on the surface. "Today we recommend a mild aromatic soak," she says, "for circulation and clarity." You step into the tub. It's warm, beautifully warm, and scented in a way that immediately relaxes your shoulders. Unlike the hip bath at home, this one is deep enough to submerge your body comfortably, and the room's warmth keeps chills at bay. The water envelops you like a cloud of gentle perfume. You lean back, you breathe in. And for a moment you fully understand why Victorians became obsessed with this. Hydrotherapy parlours were equal parts spa, medical treatment, and social outing. People believed water cured everything from melancholy to indigestion to moral failing. And while some treatments were soothing, others were downright theatrical. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Victorian hydropaths recommended wrapping patients in cold, dripping sheets, then cocooning them in blankets until they sweated out impurities. This allegedly restored balance. In reality, it mostly restored your desire to leave immediately. Back in your scented tub, you let the oils swirl around your arms. The warmth loosens muscles tightened by walking, working, and surviving the industrial atmosphere. You imagine Victorian ladies gossiping behind curtains, gentlemen trying not to slip on wet tiles, and attendants rushing around carrying trays of water like slightly anxious penguins. Historians still argue whether hydrotherapy genuinely improved health or simply made people feel better for an hour. Evidence suggests a bit of both. Hot water relaxes muscles, steam clears airways, scented oils lift spirits. But did it cure gout, moral shortcomings, or internal coldness? Probably not, unless internal coldness was just Victorian code for needing a nap. You rise from the bath carefully, wrapped immediately in a warm, fragrant towel. An attendant offers you a seat near a small brazier. You drink a cup of herbal infusion, mint, lemon balm, maybe a hint of something mystical. It soothes your throat and warms your chest. As you sit, a murmured conversation drifts by from another room. And after the electric foot bath, my nerves were positively dancing. My husband swears by the cold plunge, though I suspect it's just an excuse to avoid childcare. You smile. Victorian wellness culture is no different from modern wellness culture, always half practical, half spectacle, all wrapped in pretty marketing. You step through the parlour, noticing shelves of bottled concoctions promising purity, vitality, and rejuvenation. You pick up one labelled magnetised vital water. It sloshes like ordinary water. The label insists otherwise. You thank the attendant and exit the building, the bell tinkling again behind you. The cool city air kisses your warm skin, and your body feels lighter, almost buoyant, as if steam and scented oils have temporarily erased the weight of Victorian grime. The scented parlour is indulgent, yes. A little absurd, also, yes. But it's comforting, peaceful. A rare place where cleanliness becomes pleasure instead of obligation. You step back onto the street, refreshed and slightly glowy, ready to face the next Victorian reality, one that judges hygiene not by health, but by reputation. You step out of the scented parlour and back onto the cobblestone street, feeling warm, relaxed, and just a little bit smug about your temporary state of aromatic superiority. The city air hits you, a wave of coal dust, horse sweat, chimney smoke, and bakery smells, and immediately tries to reclaim you. But for now, you hold on to that softness from the bath, the quiet glow of the oils, the gentle steam still clinging to your collar. And as you continue walking, you begin to notice something you didn't fully register earlier. The sideways glances, the lifted eyebrows, the subtle sniff of passing strangers. Welcome to the Victorian battleground of scandals, smells, and social judgment, where cleanliness isn't just personal, it's public, political, moral, and sometimes deeply theatrical. Victorians talk a lot about odours. They whisper about them, hint about them, pass judgment on them. Use them to determine class, character, hygiene, and occasionally, romantic viability. A mainstream historical fact joins you like someone leaning in with gossip. Victorians believed scent revealed a person's social status and moral discipline. A clean smell meant virtue, respectability, and self-control. Any unpleasant odour, a sign of laziness, poverty, or even sin. You walk past a group of middle-class women chatting outside a drapery shop. One of them eyes your hair with interest, a subtle nod of approval. Another inhales slightly as you pass. Not an obvious sniff, but just enough for you to notice. In this era, smelling nice can be a compliment. Smelling bad can ruin you. You continue down the street until you reach a small square. A young working-class man walks by, a labourer, judging from his dust-covered clothes and sweat-streaked gloves. A respectable-looking matron pulls her shawl tighter and steps aside, not because he poses any danger, but because she doesn't want her delicate lavender sachet to lose the olfactory fight. Victorian class dynamics often play out through scent. Your bathhouse glow makes you stand out, but not necessarily in the way you expect. Middle-class passers-by view you as properly refreshed. Upper-class eyes mark you as someone who tries to maintain refinement, but a few members of the working class glance your way too, maybe thinking you've been indulging in luxuries they can't afford. The truth is, glamour in this era has rules, and everyone knows them. As you walk further, you pass an alleyway where two women are in a hushed argument. "You said she smelled of onions and old socks," one says. "I said she smelled slightly of onions," the other protests. "We were at the Sunday luncheon." "Well, onions happen." Victorian social conflict distilled into one perfect exchange. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Victorian households kept special visiting coats, garments only worn when going out, perfumed and carefully stored to avoid absorbing kitchen or street smells. These coats were protected like sacred relics. If you wore one near fish stew, you were basically committing a family crime. Continuing through the square, you notice a public bench occupied by two older gentlemen. Their moustaches are immaculate, their boots polished, their walking sticks carved with quiet elegance. But their scent? Well, let's say their cologne is ambitious. One smells strongly of bay rum, the other of pungent musk. The scents mix in the air like two rival operas playing at once. A young couple walks past and immediately speeds up. Smell isn't subtle in the Victorian world, and neither is judgment. Historians still argue whether these social scent codes were stricter in the middle class or upper class. Some say the middle class, rising, aspiring, anxious, policed smells harshly, terrified they might accidentally appear unrefined. Others argue the upper class hated fuss and preferred natural scents as long as they weren't overpowering. Evidence varies by decade, region, and which diary you read. But the consensus: odours mattered, deeply. You head down another street and spot a boarding house where a young woman hangs linens to dry. She looks around self-consciously. Laundry scents are judged too. Soap that smells too cheap reveals poverty. Soap that smells too floral appears pretentious. People comment, people whisper. Both can wound a reputation. Nearby, a carriage rolls past. Expensive, glossy, pulled by two grey horses. As it passes, you catch a drifting scent of jasmine and something musky and sweet. A lady inside sits rigidly, fanning herself. Her scent wafts through the air like a quiet announcement of her class. But as the carriage wheels splash through a puddle and send a mist of water, and who knows what else, onto your boots, your fragrant bubble bursts again. A child nearby snorts. "City smells win again," he says with the smugness only a soot-covered Victorian child can muster. You laugh quietly and keep walking. Victorian hygiene isn't just about staying clean, it's about staying seen as clean, respectable, decent, acceptable, wrapped in layers of judgment as dense as the soot-filled air. And as you reach the next turn, another scent meets you, warm, gentle, comforting, the smell of a small household preparing for night. Soon you'll step into the soft world of late-night routines, where the city exhales, the streets quiet, and the last cleansing rituals of the day begin. A final chance, brief as always, to feel clean before the next sunrise claims you again. Evening settles over the city in a slow, smoky hush. The chimneys exhale their last heavy breaths of the day. Street lamps flicker to life, casting soft circles of gaslit glow across cobblestones that have seen everything. From morning soot to midday crowds to the quiet exodus of factory workers heading home. And now, as you walk toward your lodging, you feel the subtle shift that happens in every Victorian household at this hour. The world softens, the day exhale begins, and the nightly ritual of Victorian bedtime freshening comes quietly into focus. You turn down a narrow street lined with terraced houses. Curtains draw shut one by one. Lamps dim behind windows. Someone hums a lullaby. Someone else coughs, because this is still the 19th century and lungs rarely behave. When you reach your room, the familiar chill greets you. The fire has burned low. The basin sits on your washstand, filled earlier by a household member who understands the sacredness of evening routines. Beside it lie your towel, your comb, your powder, and a small tin of scented balm you picked up at the apothecary. You light a candle. Its warm glow paints the room gold. Shadows dance gently on the walls, and in the quiet flicker of flame, your nightly routine begins. A mainstream historical fact floats in, calm and patient. Victorian people often washed twice a day, morning and evening, not by bathing, but by freshening at a washstand. This meant splashing the face, wiping the neck, brushing the teeth sometimes, combing the hair, and tidying the garments closest to the skin. You start with your hands. The water is cool, not bathhouse warm, not country well crisp, just evening cool. You dip your fingers in, feeling the day's residue loosen and drift away. Coal dust, sweat, pomade, mystery particles that accumulated during your travels. You rub your hands gently with a cloth, watching grey tendrils swirl in the basin. Then your face. You splash the cool water across your cheeks, temples, and jawline. It wakes you, not sharply like morning water, but soothingly, like someone whispering, "Almost done for the day." Victorian evening washes are calmer than their morning counterparts, prioritizing comfort and rest rather than alertness. You pick up your towel, the same lightly abrasive companion as always, and pat your skin dry. It leaves your face slightly pink, slightly refreshed, and slightly exfoliated whether you wanted it or not. Next comes your hair. Victorian hair, as you now understand, is a day-long negotiation. You reach for your comb and slowly draw it through your strands, loosening the bits of city life that clung to you. The powder from earlier is still doing its job, absorbing oil and keeping your hair manageable. You smooth it gently, shaping it for sleep, not styled, but tidy. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Victorians wore special nightcaps, not for warmth, but to keep hair from becoming dusty overnight. Bedroom soot drifted, constantly from fireplaces, street grime, or simply old houses breathing through their walls. A cap kept your hair clean, and occasionally flattened into creative shapes by morning. You slip yours on. It feels soft, slightly ridiculous, and extremely Victorian. Next, you unbutton your outer garments. Victorian clothing is structured, layered, and occasionally dramatic, but nighttime clothing is the opposite. A simple nightshirt or cotton gown replaces the waistcoat, corset, blouse, or petticoats. Linen underlayers are hung neatly by the fire to air out. Outer garments are brushed lightly with a stiff bristle brush to remove soot, crumbs, or whatever your city adventures collected. Historians still argue how often these garments were cleaned. Some sources say weekly, others monthly, others as needed, which is vague enough to mean anything. But one practice is consistent. Airing clothes at night was seen as essential for hygiene. You move toward the window and open it just a crack. Cold night air sweeps in. You hang your garments beside it, allowing the breeze to refresh them. The scent of the day lifts gradually, replaced by something cooler, calmer. Finally, you sit at the edge of your bed with your small tin of balm. Evening scents are gentler, less about social signalling, more about comfort. You dab a little rose balm on your wrists, letting the floral whisper blend with the natural night air. Around you, the house settles. Floorboards creak. Someone laughs softly downstairs. A kettle whistles faintly. A baby fusses, then quiets. The world dims. You blow out your candle. A thin trail of smoke curls upward, carrying the scent of warm wax and the last notes of your day. Your bedding smells faintly of lavender sachets tucked inside the pillowcase, a common Victorian trick to promote restful sleep and ward off odours. You slide beneath the heavy blankets. They're cool at first, then warm as your body settles in. You exhale slowly, sinking into the softness. Your room is dark, your hair is brushed, your skin is freshened, your clothes are airing, and the Victorian world, which demands so much from you during the day, finally lets you rest. And as you close your eyes, drifting towards sleep, you feel something almost luxurious. You feel clean, Victorian clean, which is to say, you've earned this moment. Morning will come again, cold basins, soot, soaps with attitudes, but for now, you wake slowly in the dim light of early dawn, wrapped in that rare, lingering feeling of being almost clean. Victorian standards, of course. But as you stretch beneath your heavy blankets, you already sense the world changing. Not dramatically, not instantly, but steadily, like a slow tide rising. Today's hygiene isn't just a routine. It's a glimpse of the changing tide of cleanliness that will reshape every household in the decades to come. You sit up, blinking at the pale morning light filtering through thin curtains. The air is still chilly, still carrying that faint whisper of yesterday's coal smoke. But something feels different, an undercurrent of progress weaving its way through the era. A mainstream historical fact arrives with the quiet confidence of a new invention. By the late Victorian period, plumbing, sanitation systems, hot water heaters, and germ theory were beginning to revolutionize hygiene. Not everywhere, not evenly, but undeniably. You stand and approach your washstand, the same porcelain basin you've battled every morning. But today, as you splash your face, you think of homes a few neighborhoods over that now boast indoor taps with running water. A marvel, a luxury, a foreshadowing of modern life. Not your house, of course, but someone's. You towel off, with the same scratchy towel that will never retire. And as you dress, you think of the gradual shift happening across Britain. Soap making becomes industrialized. Water companies expand pipe networks. Sewage systems improve, slowly saving entire neighborhoods from disease. Doctors, finally, wash their hands after listening to a man named Lister. And the idea of daily baths, once laughably unrealistic, begins its quiet climb toward normality. You lace your boots, button your shirt and step outside. The city greets you with the usual mix of smells, coal, horse, smoke. But the streets are changing. A new fountain stands where a water pump once struggled. A bathhouse advertises modern heated showers. A wealthy townhouse down the street installs a flushing toilet, prompting neighbours to gossip like they've just witnessed sorcery. Victorians adore progress, so long as it's polite, predictable, and introduced gently with pamphlets. You walk past a newspaper stand, a headline catches your eye. Germ theory gains support. You smile softly. The world is shifting beneath your feet, even if the soot still clings to your coat. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Victorians believed early indoor plumbing was dangerous because pipes connected households, and therefore connected their smells, sins, and vapours. One pamphlet warned that flushing toilets might send moral contagion from your neighbour directly into your home. Progress always meets fear. You keep walking, stepping over puddles reflecting the dawn light. A woman ahead of you shakes a rug from her window. Not ideal for your morning cleanliness, but tradition dies slowly. Children pass you on their way to school, faces freshly scrubbed, hair slicked with water or pomade. Their mothers wave from doorways, proud graduates of the new household hygiene manuals that are sweeping through middle-class homes. Cleanliness is becoming something more than a habit. It's becoming a cultural identity. Historians still argue whether the Victorians changed because of science, fashion, or fear. Public health records show disease outbreaks pushed reform. Diaries show pride in cleanliness. Advertisements show companies capitalizing on hygiene as status. The truth? It was all of these. Pipes, pride, and persuasion. You continue down a quieter street where the air feels fresher. The city, even with all its grime, seems hopeful, like someone has cracked a window in a stuffy room. You think of the people you've encountered, the woman scrubbing laundry over a steaming copper boiler, the schoolteacher wiping children's chins with stern affection, the apothecary proudly selling rosewater and tooth powder, the doctor who wiped his hands on a coat decorated with medical memories, the factory workers wiping soot from their brows with tired cloths, the hydropathic attendants whispering about revitalization and harmony. Every one of them is standing somewhere on the bridge between old practices and new knowledge. You return to your lodging as the day brightens. Your garments are still airing from the night before. Your basin waits for you. Your hair powder rests beside your comb. You're living in a world on the brink of transformation, one foot in the age of cold basins and cold soot, the other stepping toward plumbing, germ theory, and the modern bathroom. You breathe deeply, letting the scent of lavender from last night mingle with the faint morning chill. Victorian hygiene may be imperfect, messy, inconsistent, occasionally baffling, but it's evolving, and you've walked through it all, the rituals, the inventions, the fads, the endless tiny battles for dignity in a world still learning what cleanliness truly means. You sit on the edge of your bed, feeling the day unfold. Soon you'll stand at your washstand again. Soon the city will reclaim you. Soon the routine will begin fresh, but not yet. For now, you let yourself pause, letting the warm memory of your scented bath linger as you drift gently toward rest. The room around you begins to dim, edges softening like watercolour fading into warm paper. The last of the morning light slips quietly across the floorboards, stretching thin, then thinner still, until it becomes nothing more than a gentle glow resting against your blankets. Your breath slows, the world quiets, and the pace of the Victorian day melts into something slow and soothing. You imagine that the faint scent of lavender from your pillow is drifting upward, curling softly around your senses. Each inhale feels easier, smoother, like you're drawing in a piece of calm from a quieter century. You feel the weight of your blankets settle around your shoulders, grounding you, warming you, reminding you that you've walked through a long, winding journey. And now there is nothing left to do but rest. Even the city outside seems to hush itself, chimneys settling, footsteps fading, gas lamps flickering gently in the distance. Everything is moving slowly now, like the whole world is taking a deep breath and letting it out in one long, peaceful exhale. Your muscles loosen, your thoughts drift, and the story you've lived through, of cold basins, soft scents, warm baths, and quiet rituals, begins to fold itself neatly away, like linens set aside for the night. You let yourself sink deeper into the mattress, deeper into the warmth, deeper into the feeling that, for this small moment in time, you're exactly where you should be. Safe, soft, still. There is nothing to chase now, nothing to scrub, nothing to carry, just the gentle, slow fade into sleep.